By latest figures, 23 banks are owned and operated by the race, averaging $1 million each in assets. These banks play an important role in promoting the growth of new businesses. Each and every one represents a source of new growth and vitality for the business community. Another step towards greater economic security. Astonishing progress has been made by Negro-owned insurance firms. Over the last decade, assets increased from 25 to 165 million, a boost of over 600%, more than 4 times as great as the increase for the nation as a whole. The late C.C. Spaulding pioneered as founder of the North Carolina Mutual, the largest of Negro America's 58 insurance companies. Savings and loan associations, too, play an important role in aiding the community's economic advancement. With assets totaling in the millions, the mortgage support they offer makes possible the continued expansion of retail and manufacturing enterprises. Each year, their number increases, a reflection of the general economic picture for the race.
The current climate of generational wealth, I think in the African American community is, for the most part, it's non-existent. I think like any other population of our country, there's maybe 1 to 3% that actually have worked on generational wealth, and the rest of us are just living paycheck to paycheck, unfortunately, for the most part. Not too long ago, I was down at a high school in South Atlanta teaching a class basically about personal finances. And so I was trying to get the students to understand that no matter what they did when they grew up, if they didn't understand how to manage, let's say, $100 now, they cannot just all of a sudden manage $100,000 or their $60,000 salary or whatever the salary could be. So I started asking the students, well, what do you want to do so that we could get some salary ranges? And I literally had a young lady that told me her only mission was to marry a baller. She was looking to marry a baller. And if that didn't work out, that she was okay with getting on the pole, as she put it, and doing what she had to do. And I looked over to see if the teacher, like, am I the only adult that because I'm in shock. Everybody else is sitting there like it's normal, and I'm in shock. And I looked at the teacher, and she just kept knitting with her head down like nothing was wrong. And that mentality is scary. If we think that the African American community is suffering now, like I'm nervous to see where we go in the next 20 or 30 years when we have a generation of young people. She's 1 out of 30 that spoke up, but how many other kids in the class were thinking the same thing? You know, she was the one who was okay with really saying it and didn't think anything of it. But when our young people are watching Basketball Wives and the Real Housewives of wherever, and they're seeing this lifestyle of opulence, and everyone is driving Range Rovers, and they don't work. They just go and have wine with their friends every day. They cuss a few people out when they feel like it, but they're balling. They're blinging, they're balling, they're living that life. Like, what are we going to do? And if we don't have the conversation with our kids, that's what they're watching. That doesn't look like a life that's built on wealth creation and leaving generational wealth or leaving legacies. That is a right here, right now. I'm only worried about me, myself, and I, and what I look like today.
Hey, Mr. Jenny. Right now, we're in real bad shape. The issue is not can we amass money or can we amass wealth, if you will. The issue is where we're choosing to appropriate our monies. You know, I think a lot of us buy into the whole machine that the music industry is choosing to push on us with the Lil Wayne and the Kanye, and people buy into that, and it's causing a problem because it's altering people's thoughts. It's altering their ability to think about being frugal. To say, hey, yo, I'm cool with, you know, spending $10,000 on a house right now and living in the hood for 5 years until I can put 100 G's in my account and then make a move. but we're not thinking like that. You know, we want to blow up right now. We want it now. You know, we don't want to work. So that's a challenge. That's a behavioral change.
Wealth is partially accumulated, but partially also inherited. So accumulation of wealth is often a function of being able to live beneath your means. But if you cannot live beneath your means because you're on the poverty periphery, and we have more poverty, of course, in the African American community, then your wealth building possibilities are basically tampered down. Then when you talk about accumulated wealth, you're talking about what you inherited. And again, if you have not had opportunities, or your foremothers and fathers have not had opportunities to accumulate, you have less of that. Even the best of us, the most talented, the most educated, report that they experience, even minor, economic discrimination. So when you look at labor markets and you look at, some of the folks who got a black president, like that matters. I mean, it matters at some level, psychic, but it doesn't matter at the level of which you talk about the terms and conditions of economic activity. You've got African American CEOs, but they're just a fraction, a minor fraction. If you got 500, Fortune 500, what are we looking at? 2% of them as African American people. So despite the surface equality, when you tamp it down, you see a lot less of that.
I think generational wealth in the African American community is almost non-existent. I think that there are many other nationalities and many other races that are doing an excellent job with that. But we have been handicapped in many ways, psychologically, but then also educationally in terms of how to build that wealth.
We have been consumed with materialism and just storing up possessions, but not really assets. So we're all about getting the cars and looking like we have the house and looking like we have the right clothes, but we're not really investing in the things that create generational wealth, such as owning our own businesses or owning our own homes, owning the land, property, those type of things, real investment vehicles. We're just not focused on that.
To me, what it means is leaving something for your kids, leaving something such that when you are dead and buried, people benefit from the fact that you were here. You don't leave liabilities to your children. You're leaving assets to your children. You are allowing your family to progress as a result of the hard work you put in, as opposed to helping them get further and further behind. So an example might be when you die and they hold your funeral. Did you leave your child some stocks, bonds, and assets, or did you leave them a bunch of bills, a bunch of bill collectors, and funeral expenses that they can't pay? You see a lot of people that scramble just to pay for the funeral of somebody who died because that person didn't take the time to even get life insurance. So that's what I see generational wealth as being.
Generational wealth is nothing new. It's in the Bible. Christ commands us to take possession of the land, own the land, So that's generational wealth, and we have to first understand what that is before we can even create a wealth plan and say, oh, well, I want to leave inheritance. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Before we can even repeat that, we have to know what goes into that. What are the foundations of building wealth? A lot of people run around and say, hey, we're going to have a wealth seminar, and they're talking about MLMs, and I'm not taking a shot at multi-level marketing, organizations, but that's not a wealth building plan that's going to sustain for the next 100 years. That's not going to happen. There's cornerstones to wealth, and black folks don't even know what those cornerstones are. There's 6 wealth building foundational blocks that have to be in a portfolio in order for that portfolio to be balanced and diversified. It doesn't include an MLM. It includes businesses. It includes real estate. It includes precious metals, rhodium, platinum, palladium, gold, silver. It includes annuities. It includes equities. It includes the foreign currency exchange. Negroes don't even understand half of those terms that I'm just giving about or if they do, they're not putting those terms inside a portfolio to ensure growth over the next 100 years. Negroes can't plan past the 1st and the 15th. That's a challenge. We have to address those challenges. We have to have technical assistance. We have to have conferences. We have to have actual experts. We have to write books. We have to focus our energies and everything that we have on this subject matter. Otherwise, we're going to be relegated to the lowest common denominator in the next 10 years.
To me, generational wealth basically means that you store up enough material possessions and assets in order to leave them to your children and your children's children. So I believe that the real purpose of wealth is so that you could leave a legacy for your family, for those that come after you. And really so that everyone doesn't have to keep starting over from scratch. When you work so hard, I mean, who's working this hard only to just leave and the thought of leaving your children behind in a worse place than when they got here? You know, they got here, you know, at zero. But when we don't create systems and put things in place for wealth building and wealth creation, then we may leave them with debt. So they're worse off after we've been here working for 70 and 80 years. It's just not right. It's not fair to them. I don't think it's fair to your children to have to, you know, have a bake sale or a car wash to bury you. I don't think it's fair.
Generational wealth is wealth that passes from generation to generation. So you're not just looking at someone's current position, you're looking at what they inherited. And what we know is that African American people, by and large, inherit very little. Because by and large, generationally, African American people have earned less, and in some cases, spent more. But I underscore the earn less as opposed to spent more. In order to achieve an equivalent lifestyle, African Americans often spend more. Let's use housing as an example. How do you get your home? For many whites, your parents offer you a down payment, help you out with it. For many African Americans, that's just not there. How do you pay for your education? For many whites, their education is paid for. For most African Americans, people are going into debt and doing other things. So if you graduate with no debt, as opposed to graduating with $50,000 worth of debt, your initial life chances are very different. So those are the kinds of things that impact generational wealth. So if the average graduating debt is $26,000, but half of all young people graduate with no debt, we're talking about a higher debt for those who graduate with debt. We know that African American young people are more likely to graduate with debt, so you're looking at a larger sum of debt, which means that you graduate with a shackle of $40,000 as opposed to no shackle. Many of our young people go to community colleges as opposed to four-year schools for debt reasons. Nothing wrong with community colleges, except for when they don't have pipelines from a 2-year to a 4-year. Oftentimes young people are disadvantaged. The issue of generational wealth is what you pass on to your children or to your younger descendants, your nieces, your nephews, and others. Fewer African Americans than whites have that to tap into. So you can look at first generation or even second generation wealth and say, okay, but then you can look at multi-generational wealth and say there is always going to be an inequality unless there are ways to infuse wealth into the African American community.
The foundational habit of the 7 wealthy habits is the habit of adding value. The habit of adding value means it is better to add value and to create value for others. It is better to give than receive. Because when you create value for other people, it creates an environment of reciprocity. People see that you're generous. They want to also do something for you. So you're filling the well before you pull from it. Then you're a giver, and people like givers. And when it comes to your finances, the habit of adding value means when you make financial decisions that you're actually thinking about whether or not it's going to add value to your bottom line and your personal finances. One of the other important habits is the wealthy vision. That's the habit of leveraging your unique strengths. The habit of leveraging your unique strengths, your talents, that's how you serve other people. And the fact is, when you identify what that gift or talent is, and you become really, really good at it, that's really how you create value for other people's. That's what you create value for other people's with, and that's how you become a high earner. You become an expert in your field, and guess what? When you become an expert in your field, people want to pay you more money for it. Then you're going to identify the role that you can be the best at, and that's how you earn higher incomes.
I think that this whole issue is not just a Black thing. I think it's definitely an American thing. I think the present state of our economy tells us that, you know, foreclosures, job loss, bankruptcy is definitely not only in the Black community. But I will say, I think that it overwhelmingly affects the Black community. And I think it goes back to, again, not having proper education. And not being willing to discuss these things at the dinner table. Or are we even sitting at the dinner table to have the opportunity to discuss it? I think it goes back just to the Black family and establishing what our values are as families first. And if wealth building and just making money and your finances a priority, if that's a priority for your family, then you'll make the time to have that discussion. But I think far too often we're not taking the time to just talk about it.
I think this issue that you bring up is specific to Black people. And to really go into this issue, we're going to have to get psychologists is the word I was looking for, and sociologists to really investigate middle passage, all of this, because we're acting out right now. And so we're not living up to our fullest potential. That's by choice. Success is a choice. Anybody, the immigrant entrepreneurship 101, the doors are wide open in America. Any other group of people can come here and they excel. The Koreans come, they set up in the community, they excel. The Patel family, the Indians come in, they get into the lodging sector and the hotel sector, they excel. So, now Black folks have no excuse right now. So, but we still choose to be illiterate when there's Google. Back in the day, my mom would say that they would chop Negroes' hands off for reading books. And now you can go to Google, go to YouTube, you can learn, you can self-teach, self-educate, and we're not doing that. That's a mental issue, that's a mental issue which is going to require a lot of healing psychologically because the capacity is there and we're choosing not. That's a problem, it's a major problem. Nobody's really talking about that.
I think it's something that transcends cultures in the United States. However, I think it affects us more than other cultures within our geographic area. I think that we are a race of spenders. The country is in general, but it affects us more because we're a $1 trillion market in the African American community. However, when it comes to savings rates and spending rates, our spending rates are really high while our savings rates are really low. So this is definitely something that affects the African American community, and we don't have the leeway like other cultures do to make those types of mistakes, because in order for us to gain more power, we need economic power, because for the last 50, 60 years, we've been focusing on political and social equality, but now it's time to make sure that we get that economic equality as well.
I have sat down with probably over 200 people in the last 18 months for one-on-one counseling or coaching. And I have literally had people tell me that I just don't want to. We've talked about a plan for them to build wealth. We've talked about a plan for them to get out of debt, get their credit together. And when it comes to mentioning anything that has to do with a little bit of sacrifice, which sometimes that's what it is. You didn't get into debt overnight. You didn't start these bad habits overnight, and it's going to take time in order for you to see the success with your finances that you want. But I've had people that say, I like wearing Gucci. I like my lifestyle, and I'll die broke, and my kids will have to figure it out because I've worked hard and I deserve to live the lifestyle that I want to live, and with a straight face. We are so disconnected from our history and from what people fought for to get us to this place. Back then, in let's say the 50s, the 60s, when people were fighting for education, they were fighting so that their children and their children's children would have a right and access to education, so that they could create better lives and do more for their family, not just their family, but also the community. And we have become so entitled. Like, we don't understand that someone fought for us to have this privilege. And so when you get so removed from it, it's easy to think that it's all about you. And that, well, now I have an education and my job is to make sure that everyone knows I have an education. And the only way that I can show them that is by me wearing the fancy clothes or driving the fancy car. That's how I prove that I've made it. It's not about taking care of the generations that come after me as it once was. And it's not about community like it once was. It's just about, there's this selfish sense of entitlement that's so prevalent. And I think a lot of it has to do with maybe media. I think the images that we see on movies and videos is this very glorified, personified version of just, it's all about me, look at what I'm wearing, look at my bling bling. It's gotten out of hand. And what was once created as just entertainment, we've taken that and made that our value system in our own homes, and it's ridiculous.
Have we let down previous generations? Well, it depends on how you look at success. I mean, if you look at success as achieving integration and acceptance from the broader population, and getting access to the most powerful and prestigious institutions in America, then no, we haven't let them down. We're living the dream, right? This is what they dreamed about: little black boys and little white girls holding hands, and us sitting in the White House. I mean, we sitting in the White House, man. I mean, there's a lot of folks 100 years ago that couldn't even imagine that, right? But when you talk about self-sufficiency and some of the lessons that Malcolm X gave us about independence, I think we have let them down. We are not self-sufficient. I would argue that we become less self-sufficient over time. Sometimes necessity really does become the mother of invention. When you have tremendous human capital, tremendous amounts of resources that are not being accepted by the broader marketplace, it forces you to use those resources in whatever way you can. For example, if you have a doctor and a lawyer and a carpenter and a cook that all can't find work because the white businesses are not hiring black employees, well, that forces those people to say, you know what, I have to survive and I know I have value. So let's create an economy right here. Let's create institutions here that allow us to utilize our skill. And so what happens is, it's just that old saying, no pain, no gain. So you've gone through the pain of not getting the easy route to quote unquote prosperity, but you get the gain of having to make something out of nothing. And then what you find is that when you've committed to this alternative route, where you have to create something just to survive, you find that you are stronger than you would have been if you had taken the easy path. So integration cleared the easy path for us, but it did not make us stronger in the end.
So I think it's amazing that the generations before us had little to no resources, probably 2 to 3 times the number of children, and were still able to save a considerable amount of money, pay for their homes in cash, really pay a home off. They owned it. They had the deed to the home, have cars and all these different things, and make sure that their children were able to take advantage of quality education with so much less than we have today. And we have 2.5 children today. And, 2-parent homes will both have degrees, not to mention the fact that these are professional people. I'm talking about professional folks, husband's a lawyer, wife's a doctor type of thing, type of Cosby Show look. And still we're facing foreclosure, bankruptcy. Children still have to take out student loans, which is ridiculous, taking out private loans at this point. all these different things. What's the difference? We have to ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong that our grandparents could make it on being a housekeeper and a bus driver, maybe, or working in a factory and the wife not working at all, and send 5 and 6 kids to school, and we can't figure it out with professional degrees and 2 children? How is this possible? And it's us, and we have to take responsibility and ask ourselves, what's more important? Our grandparents knew that education was the most important thing for us. I think that we think looking like we have an education is the most important thing, and that's the difference. They knew that it was the most important thing, and we know, but we just want to look a certain way and leave the other stuff behind. We rather look like we have $1 million than really figure out how to save $1 million or invest to make it. We rather just look like it, and it's sad.
While there has been some economic success as well as historical economic success, there have also been a series of failures. And not only failures, but intentional failures. As far as I'm concerned, there have been cases of what I call economic genocide. Tulsa, 1921, where people just came and took your stuff. If you go back into the 1920s and 30s, during the Depression, when people defaulted on their taxes because they didn't have any money, white folks got forbearance, black folks had their land seized. So when you talk about generational wealth, one of the things you have to talk about is the economic genocide that took wealth away from black people, that simply took it. If you protested, you were out of there. I mean, if you protested, you were literally ran out of town. And there were stories upon stories upon stories of this. So there were some African American people who hoped to accumulate, who hoped to pass it down, and didn't have the opportunity. But even leaving that, which is a huge loss of generational wealth, you also want to look at the ways that people were denied the opportunity to accumulate because of fewer wages, because of the whole sharecropping system, which you never broke even, much less gained any money. So if you went back and looked at the history of African American people in our economic system, what you would have to say is that we participated with a combination of hope and despair. We hoped that our country would treat us fairly. We despaired that it ever would. The hope allowed you to attempt to accumulate, allowed you to attempt to be a citizen, allowed you to believe that nobody was going to take your wealth. The despair for many people let them know that that just wasn't the case. We want to look at World War II and its aftermath, which represented, in my opinion, one of the greatest wealth transfers from black people to white people. Now, that may be an extreme opinion, but why our tax dollars were used to economically advantage white people and to exclude black people. So World War II veterans had the opportunity to accumulate through the Fair Housing Administration, the opportunity to accumulate through the education bills that were part of the GI Bill. African Americans were denied that. Katz Nelson wrote a brilliant book called When Affirmative Action Was White. And he talks about how white people benefited because they were veterans, but black people did not. So many white men had the opportunity to go to college, to go to graduate school because of the GI Bill. They usually went before a state board to get the okay for their participation. Black men, many, did not have that opportunity. In Mississippi, fewer than 200 African American men were given the opportunity to go to college. Many were told, well, go to barber school. These were federal dollars, and this had an impact on generational wealth. I think if you went back and looked at the history, you would look at examples that would make you sick, that would literally sizzle with the level of injustice that happened with African American people. As Dr. Martin Luther King once said, he talked about reparations in a very veiled way, and he talked about all the things that white people got that black people didn't get. He talked about the Homestead Act, which allowed immigrant white people to claim 40 acres of Western land to build their families and their farms. That's where the 40 acres and a mule came from, because white folks got their 40 acres. We never did. And you go down and look at the ways that whites were advantaged, or African American people were not advantaged, and you wonder that black people have anything. And so then when you look at the wealth data, the last survey, about 12% of African American people literally have no stuff. Excuse my ebonics, but I need you to hear it the way I hear it. They ain't got no stuff. No cars, no homes, no checking or savings accounts. They have nothing. Nothing. Where only 1% of whites are in that same position. Now, one might again have an argument about why they don't have anything, but I would say that part of it is, again, the lack of generational wealth, and part of it is insistent, consistent, and contemporary discrimination. Insistent, consistent, and contemporary. Because a lot of people will tell you, well, that was back in the day. No, it wasn't back in the day. You can find today that Tammy will get a job before Tamika does. You can find today obvious cases of racial and wealth and economic discrimination. Now, they don't all come to the fore, and people have become embarrassed about talking about discrimination because you've got all these people, well, that's not really discrimination. It is. How do you end up with twice the unemployment rates? How do you end up with African American people, 13% of the population, having 2% of the wealth? How do you end up with that unless there was an intentional plan? If not today, then with inherited, issues. It interests me a lot when we talk about the plan and the conspiracy. You get a lot of black folks who will talk about a conspiracy. See, you don't have to have a conspiracy theory if you have institutional racism. The white folks are not sitting in a room saying, all in favor of discriminating black people, raise your hand and say aye. That's not how it goes down. You set up unequal structures that provide unequal outcomes.
The next habit is the wealthy appetite, the habit of lifelong learning, and increasing your financial acumen. Why it's so important for you to understand how money works, how the financial markets work, is because it's not enough to earn it. You've got to learn how to keep it, but not only keep it, but grow it. One of the major reasons for the wealth gap is that far too many minorities and women, we know how to save, but unfortunately, that our money won't grow. And so in order for your money to grow, you've got to learn how to plan it in different areas so that it can grow, so that you do have different eggs in different baskets. You do take advantage of your retirement account, but that you don't just pick the safest investment, that you pick investments that you take calculated risk, and that you pick investments that are going to grow over the long term. One of the other important habits, one of the other important attitudes and behaviors of financially successful people is having a wealthy focus. And that's the habit of setting and achieving goals. I often say that if you don't have a plan, you're going to be a part of somebody else's plan. And when you begin to set specific financial goals, and really, it's not difficult. If you're going to put together a financial plan, there are basically 4 goals we all need to accomplish. First goal is having an emergency fund. In the event something happens, and something is going to happen, the car's going to break down, refrigerator, something's going to happen. And if you don't have funds available, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the credit cards. And so that's how we have a tendency to accumulate so much debt, because we have no funds available in the event something happens. Speaking about debt, That's one of the other goals you need to have. If you have debt, you need to set up a systematic plan for paying it off. And so one of your goals should be to pay your debt off, and because that's like giving yourself a raise. One of the next goals we all need to have is home ownership. Now, I know that a lot of people who are going to watch this say, oh, I had such a, maybe you've been through the foreclosure crisis. Many of us are still in recovery. But if we learned anything, what we should have learned was that we need to buy a home we can afford. The next goal we should all have is the goal for retirement. You can call it what you want, retirement. I call it financial independence. And that's the time when my money works and I no longer have to. Let me throw a fifth goal in there, though, really. All of us should be saving. If we have children, we should start a college savings fund at the time they're born or even before, if we're planning on having kids. Because one of the things we know now is that college debt could become our next financial crisis. And for African Americans, for minorities, we're carrying more debt than ever because we have not properly planned. And so putting those goals together, having a strategy, and will you achieve it all at one time? No. But if you just do what I call nickel and dime your way to wealth and have, $25 or $50 going towards each of those goals every month in something like a mutual fund or an investment that's going to grow, you are going to be able to accumulate the type of wealth you need once you retire.
The first step is you have to get out of debt. So before we can even really get to wealth building, we have to talk about saving and getting out of debt, because you can't create a whole bunch of wealth when you have creditors down your back, and you have 20% car loan rates, and there's no way to build wealth in that position. So the first thing we all need to do is focus on debt elimination.
When you talk about student loans, for example, there's no reason that you have to have $80,000 in student loans to go to college. You don't have to go to that university that costs $30,000 a year. You could go to another university that's $10,000 a year that's right there in state and have less debt than you would like trying to go to some private school. I think little steps like that can make a difference. When you talk about things like credit card debt and mortgage debt, I think that getting a mortgage that is going to be hard to pay is not always a good decision. Automobile debt is not always a good choice. I know I bought a car that I paid for with cash that is probably it's so raggedy that people are shocked when I drive that car. People say, "Oh, Dr. Boyce Watkins is," I'm sure he's driving a Benz or a Bentley. I'm like, no, I ain't. Nope. I'm driving that car that I paid for with cash because I don't want a car note. Because I just need to get to point A to point B. I ain't trying to floss and bling on my way to the grocery store. So I think that avoiding debt, that especially unnecessary debt, is absolutely critical to building wealth. Because remember that the more you try to maintain a high level lifestyle, the more you become enslaved to that lifestyle. And if you're dependent upon somebody else to get what you need to maintain that lifestyle, that makes you a slave to both the lifestyle and the person who's giving you what you need to maintain the lifestyle. So ultimately you wake up and you realize that you might feel that you have a lot of resources and a lot of assets and all these other things that you think you have, but really you realize that you don't control your own life anymore and your own choices anymore. So financial freedom first starts not just with having enough wealth to overcome your financial obstacles, but it actually comes with reducing the level of dependence that you have on economic prosperity as your source of happiness to begin with.
Individually, the best thing that we can do is just start having these kinds of conversations. For instance, let's just make it real personal instead of, talking about a whole lot of concepts and stuff like this. I don't want my son to pay for college. I don't want to have to utilize debt to pay for his college. My son wants to go to Dartmouth, right? So Dartmouth and he went on the internet and told me before I could even do it, he says, Dad, Dartmouth's $68,000 per year. Multiply that times 4. We're looking at $250,000, $300,000 for this kid to go to, Dartmouth, or if he changes his mind and decides to go to Columbia, whatever the situation is, he's set on going to an Ivy League institution, right? Now, we don't want to finance that using debt. What does that mean? That means that we need to figure out a plan for him to be able to pay for this using equity, meaning we writing a check. There's no way that we're going to take out a $200,000, $300,000 loan to pay for an education that when he gets out probably won't be making. Most black men first year out of college don't make more than $32,500. That's Google that. So that clearly doesn't make sense for him to even go that route, because then he's in the hamster wheel like everybody else out here. So the question then becomes, well, how are we going to finance this? What are we going to do? What kind of plan are we going to create? Are we going to put in place to get that going? What kind of real estate are we purchasing that we can sell in the next 24 months or the next 36 months so that that kind of money is amassed? What kind of 529 plan is in place, and how much money is in that 529 right now? And what's the shortfall? What do we got to do to make up the difference? These are the kind of conversations that we need to have. My son tells me, he says, Dad, I teach a class on tax lien certificates, which is basically how we can purchase real estate without using a mortgage. The whole mortgage is a joke. Even the word mortgage, the first word means mortifit, means death in the Latin. The second word is engage. The word mortgage means an engagement until death. My son says, Dad, I don't want to have a mortgage. Matter of fact, in high school, I want to be able to purchase some real estate. Can I use the tax lien strategy to purchase some real estate while I'm in high school so I can rent it out? So by the time I go to college, I'm collecting rent money. It's my son, 15-year-old kid. This is the game he's coming to me. These are the ideas that he's coming to me with, right? These are the kind of conversations we need to have in the house. We don't need to be wasting time, wasting our energy and our breath on things that make no sense. Lil Wayne makes no sense. Wearing your pants hanging off your behind makes no sense. But we still focus on these things. These guys come to Atlanta and they fight outside of the flipping the Civic Center. It makes no sense, but 22 million people still tune in to watch it. 27 million people tune in to watch Stevie J and Jocelyn Hernandez. What's wrong with that? Black folks, something's wrong with that. So we have to make decisions about what we're choosing to allow into our houses and the conversations that we're having at the kitchen table. This is the problem.
One of the other essential habits is having a wealthy system. The habit of setting your financial future on autopilot. The last habit that I talked about was the wealthy focus, and that's having goals. But when you set up this wealthy system, you're going to set it up so that your investments, your money is automatically being put into accounts that are going to help you achieve your goals every month. You know, one of the main reasons people don't invest is because they think you need a lot of money. You don't. Of course, when I started out in the industry more than 20 years ago, you couldn't invest in a mutual fund for less than $10,000. Now, anyone can invest with as little as $25 to $50 a month. Just like you have the money taken out of your retirement account at work, whether it's a 401k or a 403b, that's the same strategy you want to use when you're putting money away for an emergency fund, when you're putting money away for that down payment on a home. Any goal should have an investment account attached to it, and your money should be systematically being directed into those funds so that over time, little bits of money compounded over time really add up. And a wealthy system means that you understand the power of compounding. The next habit is a wealthy mindset. This is really important. The wealthy mindset is the habit of viewing problems as opportunities, because that's what they are. Earlier, I talked about the fact that it's difficult to do what you need to do because so many people around you are doing what everybody else is doing. They're buying the biggest car, the biggest house, really thinking that what they have on the outside conveys that they have wealth. When the fact is, wealthy people don't buy the most expensive things. They buy their cars used so that it doesn't depreciate when it goes off the lot. They look for the house in the best neighborhood that's a fixer-upper. You have to be willing to do what other people aren't going to do. Now, when it comes to your finances, the wealthy mindset means, looking at problems as opportunities, is that when the stock market goes down, you have to be willing to stay the course. Actually, that's when you should be investing. But again, if you're nickel and diming your way to wealth and you have money going into different mutual funds towards those goals, when the market goes down, you're going to buy at lower prices. When the market goes up, you haven't bought everything at a high price, so your cost averages out. Viewing problems as opportunities is essential so that you can build wealth over the long term.
We got to change the psychology. The psychology is everything. I think that we have to have more campaigns that encourage people to buy black, number one, support each other's businesses, to create these businesses. We have to encourage the community to really think about what wealth really means, understand that wealth is not just money and that there are some things more important than money. So we can get away from this addiction to money and consumerism as the be-all, end-all to our whole existence. I think that we have to talk more in terms of exalting and celebrating those of us who have that courage to develop institutions, as opposed to simply comparing them to the big white corporation that they're having trouble competing with, right? I think sometimes we get so caught up in this power prosperity thing that we focus more on what somebody has as opposed to focusing on how they got what they have. So it's no different from how people will celebrate the drug dealer on the block and not think about the horrible things he did to get that money. Well, people do that as well when it comes to businesses. They say, well, yeah, you got a nice little $500,000 company, that's cute, but this other company here is worth $1 billion, and so I give them more respect than I give you. No, I think there should be some respect shown toward people who have that courage to build things.
What we have to do as a community to make sure that this is the last generation that has to start from scratch is get clear about what our values are and what our goals are. If that is in fact the goal, then we have to look at ourselves and say, what change can I make today? What can I do today? What can I get rid of today? How can I reassess where my resources are going? How can I get a savings plan in place? How can I get a debt elimination plan in place? Because it's not going to just happen. And it's great to sit in a place like this and talk about it, but if you don't leave and become about it, then nothing is going to change. We have to stop talking and start doing. And we are a community that's good for talking and running our mouths and talking about what the problem is and who the problem is, and not looking inward and going, but how do I become the solution to the problem? Because it's a collective effort. And every family is going to have to stand up at some point and say, I'm going to do my part. Not just for my family, but for my community as a whole. So that generations from now, they can look back and know that, yeah, we had gone off the path, but there was a generation of people who said, we're going to make this thing right.
A community can make savings and accumulation a priority. Just like you have contests for who shoots the most basketball hoops, why not have a contest about who saves the most money? Why not, with our young people, instead of encouraging sports, and I'm not hating on sports, well, why not think about things like junior achievement, where you learn how to put a business together, learn things like a balance sheet, think and talk about profit and loss. I think the other thing is profit and loss. Lots of African American people don't have an entrepreneurial spirit. And you know why they don't. We have experienced so many risks in our life, in our history, that to say, let's put it all out on a limb and gamble to make sure my business is going to succeed is a little scary for people. But we have to encourage risk and reward. So when you take the risk, you will get a reward. And entrepreneurial people take the risk, lose it, and get back up and try again. But we need to have conversations about money just like we have conversations about everything else. We will get upset about a murder, a death. We'll go out on the sidewalk and protest, and that's good. When do we protest with the same vehemence about discrimination in mortgage lending? When 3 points of interest mean hundreds of thousands of dollars later. I mean, that's something we're fighting about.
The most important thing that you can do is buy black. Buy black, buy black, buy black. Because it's super important for those dollars to recycle in our community instead of leaving as soon as they come in. If we want a 21st century replica of Black Wall Street, or Sweet Auburn, or whatever it may be, it's going to start with buying black. So back then, a lot of those things were a necessity because we weren't allowed to buy white. So we had the black dentists, we had the black doctors, we had the black business owners, the black store owners who had a majority black-owned clientele, and I think that's because the options were limited. So it forced us to thrive economically. Now, since we have these different options, we've kind of lost our way a little bit. We don't have that urgency like we did in the 1950s and 1960s to overcome these economic inequalities. I think culture has something to do with it too, in the sense that you see these rappers blinging the ball, but when they're really busted and broke, you know what I mean? So we need to make sure that we support black businesses because that's the only way for us to move forward.
The first step people should take when it comes to building intergenerational wealth would be one, save more than you spend. Don't think like a consumer anymore, or at least not a pure consumer. Building that emergency fund of savings is what every financial advisor tells you should be your first step. Number two, diversify your income streams. Find a quote-unquote side hustle or something that allows you to have money coming from multiple sources, because you really don't have job security if you've only got one job. Economic security is as important as economic prosperity. And a lot of us do not have economic security. Many of us are living paycheck to paycheck. Next, understand that wealth is not just financial. If you can also pass on wealth through knowledge and information, for example, among other things. So make sure that your kids understand the things that you may not understand. Make sure your kids are positioned to live out some of the dreams that maybe you passed up on when you were a child. So, for example, if there's an entrepreneurship camp or something where your child can learn how to create their own business, send them to that camp. Or teach them the basics of financial literacy at an early age so they don't mess up their credit or they don't overspend their money. Because remember, you don't have to leave your children money to leave them something valuable. Now, in terms of leaving them money, I would think in terms of ownership. I'm a big believer in ownership. Everybody has to own something. It's hard to be independent if you don't own the land on which you stand. So by diversifying your income streams, obtaining the ownership of something, that allows you the opportunity to leave your kids something. The final thing I would make sure I did is make sure that you have everything in place so that when you pass, your children will be better off than they were when you were here, as opposed to worse off. That means your funeral should be paid for. All the medical bills and the creditors should be dealt with in some way that's not going to be passed on to people after you're gone. I think if you do that would be a good first few steps to take to leave something for your kids to be satisfied with.
The Bible says to renew your mind daily, and you have to be intentional about that. So when we look at renewing our mind, we have to get into what are we choosing to put in our mind. What books are we reading? Jim Rohn had this photo that was posted on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, or not Jim Rohn, but his organization. And it says, a rich, wealthy man library looks like this. And they showed this room. It was like huge books, floor to ceiling. The room had to be about almost 5,000 square feet. Just books, information. Poor man's house looks like this. And he just showed a regular house with a big TV. TV had to be 100 inches big, right? And the dude was on the couch sitting there watching that. What does that say? That says that we have to be intentional about what we're utilizing to renew our minds. When we're renewing our minds, which books are we selecting? And are those books that we select from people who are really intentional about wealth building? George Fraser says all the time, success leaves clues. David, you're not reading enough autobiographies. What are some autobiographies? A great read for autobiography is Warren Buffett's autobiography. It's 800-something pages long. Great read. It talks about his entire career from soup to nuts. Another great read, which is really not to be sacrilegious, but like the Bible or starting point for entrepreneurs, I believe is Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That Rich Dad, Poor Dad breaks down a whole lot of introductory concepts to wealth building. One of them happens to be the cash flow quadrant, where a lot of Americans are on the left side of the quadrant and they're trying to get on the right side of the quadrant. And a lot of people, when they look at those quadrants, they, you have E, which is for employer, and then you have S, which is for self-employed, you have B for business owner, and I for investor. But a lot of people think that just being a B, a business owner, will get them out of the hole, when in actuality, if you don't manage your staff, then you lose your business. So the real deal is, how can I become I, which is the investor, in which the investor's money is making money plus compounding interest. You can't have those conversations if you don't know about these philosophies. You can't talk about these philosophies if you're not reading these books. Negroes don't read enough. That's a t-shirt that I got out, and I got to put that enough on there, otherwise we're going to get some emails. But we're not reading enough. And so when we read, when we're intentional about what we're reading, we can get these concepts, we can implement these concepts, and then we can start seeing solutions in our own lives. Because that's what's impacted my life, is, reading specific books and being intentional about wealth building.
I read a description of how wealthy people think, and I thought it just crystallized these attitudes and behaviors. And so I like to share this because I think it's a really simple way of understanding the difference between working class people and wealthy people. And so this is how I like to describe it. Poverty-minded people think and manage their finances day to day. Poor people think and manage their finances week to week. Middle-class people manage their finances and think month to month. I mean, think about it. You even buy a home, a mortgage payment. Can you afford it? Month to month. A car payment. Can you afford it? Rich people manage their money year to year. They're already planning for the future and allocating how much is going to go into investments. Affluent people manage their money decade to decade, and wealthy people manage their finances generation to generation. So when you really think about what's the difference between a poverty-minded person and a wealthy person, and it's the ability to make decisions long term. So to be truly wealthy, you've got to be thinking about the decisions that you make today and how they're going to impact the next generation. Wealthy people think, act, and manage their finances differently. These habits and behaviors, they're really not difficult to adopt. But they're not difficult. So the way I like to put it, it's not hard, but it ain't easy. Really, you have to almost do the opposite of what all your peers are doing, because they're managing their money the wrong way too.
To acquire wealth, you have to think about wealth and value in a certain way. You have to think like a producer and an investor rather than a consumer and a spender and a borrower. A lot of us grow up thinking that if you get a paycheck, your job is to go out and spend that paycheck making Nike rich, buying the latest Jordans or whatever it is you want to get. You hear people talk about, when I get my taxes, I'm going to go buy me this, I'm going to buy me that. And it's okay to be a consumer to a point. All of us consume something. But if all you do is consume and borrow and spend, and you don't save and invest, then you are going to end up with an economic deficit relative to the rest of the world. Other people will get rich because of you, but you won't get rich because of what you're doing. And to some extent, you even become more enslaved to the economy around you. You are the drug addict, and somebody else is the drug pusher. You are the prostitute, someone else is the pimp. To think in terms of wealth building, you want to spend some time thinking, how can I produce something that I can bring to the economy that other people will pay for? How can I invest in something today, not just make a financial investment, but maybe an investment in terms of time and energy? What can I invest in today that will give me wealth tomorrow? If you think as an investor and as a producer, then what will happen is you could still be a consumer. Sometimes you might even be a borrower and all this other stuff. But what happens is you have a net surplus with the rest of the economy where you are consuming, but what you consume is less or lower in value than what you produce. So that I think that your mindset is everything. In fact, 90% of wealth building and money management is psychological. I have a PhD in finance, but my greatest and first finance professor was my grandmother, who never went to college, never made more than $20,000 a year. But she never had to borrow money from anybody. She had AAA credit. All her credit cards had a zero balance. She was on point. And she always told me that, she said it's very simple. If you think like a spender, then you will always be broke, because when you get more money, all you're going to do is spend more. If you think like a saver, then you're always going to have money, because savers, when they get more money, they save more. So psychology is everything. The 5E philosophy basically says that economics plus education plus expectations equals empowerment. And I think in terms of what we would teach our kids, you can achieve at least 80 to 90% of your liberation as a person of color in America by focusing on those things. They all start with the letter E. Economics means that if you manage your money effectively, you are a producer and a saver and an investor, as opposed to being a consumer and a spender and a borrower. By doing that, you can achieve a lot of liberation when it comes to your money. Because remember, the greatest amount of power I can have over you is for you to know that I'm the reason that your kids get to eat every day. So if you really want to be free as a person of color, socially, spiritually, psychologically, etc., you have to be very careful about where you get your money. Because if something happens and there's a social injustice that calls for you to stand up, but yet you're dependent upon me economically, then I'm going to tell you to sit right back down, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. So that economic piece is incredibly important when it comes to being empowered in this society, especially in a capitalist society where money kind of drives pretty much everything that happens in America. Education is probably the most important investment anybody can make. Again, I'm not talking about just going to school. I'm talking about truly being educated. Most of the education actually occurs outside of the walls of some university or institution. But education is incredibly important, not just from a personal enlightenment standpoint, but also as an investment in itself. The ability to sacrifice today in order to have something tomorrow, I think, is important. I think that we need to become fanatical about education. We have to become absolute lunatics when it comes to making sure our kids are as well educated as they can possibly be, and that we are also educated ourselves. I think that's critically important. In fact, the biggest mistake that any person of color can make in America today is to walk away from education, because when you walk away from education, you are walking right back into slavery. Third piece, expectations. Set the highest expectations for your kids, for yourself, in terms of your integrity, your values, your work ethic, all those things. Because the other thing is, about expectations when it comes to integrity and personal decisions, is that integrity piece is what holds things together. That's what holds families together. A man's integrity, his expectations for himself, are what make him say, I am a husband and a father, and I'm going to keep this family together even though times are hard right now. Because a man that doesn't have high expectations for himself, that doesn't have a foundation of integrity, is going to say, well, I wouldn't have left my wife and my kids, but I couldn't find a job. So expectations are incredibly important. And so economics plus education plus expectations equals empowerment. Everything starts with the letter E, so it's easy to remember.
That book says, Hosea 3:6, people perish, people die because of lack of information. The black community is dying because of lack of information. Has to do with information. Has nothing to do with whether you're from Campbellton Road or you live in Buckhead or Bankhead or whatever. Has to do with information and the application of that information. That's true wisdom. Entrepreneurship is not new to us. Van Sertima, in his great research, found in northern parts of South America and Venezuela, northern parts of Venezuela, the Olmec culture, they found heads, Africans with noses and big lips, and it's dated from 583 BC, man. Come on. How is that happening? They want to tell us, oh, we got to take us a bank holiday because it's Christopher Columbus. Get out of here with that. Cats was on reed boats, man. Reed boats. That means this is stuff that was woven with a plant, and they was doing intercontinental transactions with salt and with all kind of other natural resources Africans was trading. Get out of here with that. We being bamboozled, man. This is coonery and buffoonery is the show that's going on right now, man. We got to stop that. That's not the regularly scheduled programming. So we got to come with the real, and the real is knowledge, and we got to apply that knowledge. We're not applying the knowledge, man. We're getting lost in the sauce.
It sounds nice that everyone should be and can be an entrepreneur, and I think that theoretically it's true, but not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. But for those people who don't want to be entrepreneurs, there are still ways that you can do your part to make sure that we have a thriving African American community for generations to come. And I think that has to do with investment in African American owned businesses, and really investment in our own people as well. I think that, even just simple things like organizing investment clubs at your church or your, fraternity or sorority or whatever it may be, instead of, investing that additional money into stocks and bonds that, mainly go to white-owned businesses, white-owned conglomerates, start investing that money into local businesses who are, foundations and pillars that make your community strong. And I think what you're going to see is these small investment clubs with your church and things like that. It's just another form of what's already happening in a broader landscape with sites like Kickstarter and others who use crowdfunding and crowdsourcing to make ideas come about.
I believe that the richest place in the world is the graveyard, and that's because so many of us die with the best book that could have been written, with the best song, the best script, because we are so worried about keeping up with everyone else instead of really searching ourselves for our own gifts and talents and that thing that could potentially produce wealth for our family. Because in Deuteronomy it says that God gives you the ability to produce wealth. And so when we don't take advantage of that ability, and it says give, he gives you. You didn't pay for it. You didn't have to beg for it. You didn't have to look around asking for it. It might have taken a little work to uncover it or discover it, but it's there and we all have it. But when you don't take advantage of it, then who else can you blame? And when you go to your grave with it and then leave your children and your grandchildren with tens of thousands of dollars of your debt, who else can you blame? God gave it to you freely. So when you don't use it, it's an insult to God and it's a disgrace to your family.
One, before you even get started, so if you're still working for someone else, read about entrepreneurship and economics and marketing and finance and accounting, just all the aspects of business. Try to get as much knowledge as you possibly can, because you don't have to wait to get a degree to actually start learning. I always tell people I learned more outside of business school and undergrad than I ever did when I was actually in school. So that would be the first thing. I think the second thing is to make sure that you get started. Because a lot of people have that initial fear of quitting their job or losing that additional income. And I can understand that fear. I had that fear too, because I gave up, quite a bit of corporate money to, start my own thing with Great Black Speakers 5 years ago. But you have to have that courage to make sure you take that step. And you don't have to take that step all the way. Maybe it's just a half step. Maybe you start something on the side, start your little side hustle and see where it goes. But make sure that you get started. I think actually one more thing, a third thing is if you are looking forward to starting entrepreneurship, cut your expenses. Don't get used to the high lifestyle, because as soon as you get hooked to that corporate money, you become a slave to the corporate dollar. And and once you are in those shackles of that green, it's hard to move anywhere else. Fourth thing is make sure you don't actually have to you don't have to take that time risk yourself. If you know of any other great entrepreneurs who are doing excellent things who need that startup capital, you can invest in them and take a piece of their company and get it started that way as well.
We started with a foundational habit. A wealthy outlook, the habit of adding value. It is better to give than receive. We end on that note. The wealthy legacy, the habit of paying it forward. When I describe the difference between a poverty-minded person versus a wealthy person, that wealthy person had the mindset of leaving a legacy from generation to generation. For many of us, being the first to have a professional career or finish college, we started out as what I call scratch babies. We started from scratch with no legacy. We had to build on our own. A wealthy legacy means that we're going to pay it forward, that our children will be able to start out with a financial foundation, something that they can continue to build on. A wealthy legacy and the habit of paying it forward means making sure that you have adequate life insurance. In fact, that's how most wealth really is accumulated, through things like life insurance and estate planning. Making sure that you pay knowledge forward, that the next generation does not start out financially illiterate. That we have conversations about investing, about building wealth, and that rather than giving our children the newest toy, the newest gadget, that we give gifts of stock, the gifts that keep on giving, that we invest for their college funds, at graduations, at Christmas. Having a wealthy legacy means thinking long term and making our decisions based on the impact they're going to have for the next generation.